Welcome to Real Estate Coaching Radio, starring award-winning real estate coaches and #1 international best-selling authors, Tim and Julie Harris. Real Estate Coaching Radio is the nation's #1 daily radio show for realtors who demand authentic, real-time coaching. Get ready for fluff-free, unfiltered, full-strength honesty about what's truly working to get you into action, helping others, and making money now in today's real estate market. Now to our hosts, Tim and Julie Harris.
Welcome back, listeners. I have something very special for you today. Hopefully you're blessed like I am with a lot of really, truly interesting people in your life. Julie and I have this podcast that goes everywhere, and we have our books and whatnot. And even amongst all the conversations we have with, literally hundreds and if not thousands of people per month, occasionally I come across somebody who I think is truly interesting, and that is today's special guest. And today's special guest, guys, and I'm going to brag for him before I introduce him because I'm pretty sure he won't let me do it. So here's basically the new requirements. You have to have at least this number of credits to your name before you're allowed to be on our podcast. Get ready? First of all, you had to have gone to Yale for undergraduate. You had to have graduated from Harvard to have at least an MBA. No, that's not good enough anymore. You have to have served in the military, preferably the Marines, or maybe a SEAL. Oh, and we have one more requirement. You have to have actually flown F-18 fighter jets and been a pilot, like Tom Cruise in Top Gun, though he flew F-16s. So those are the new minimum requirements. And when I was searching around amongst all of our podcast listeners and coaching clients, there's only one person that met those requirements, and it's Mr. LeGrand Elebash. LeGrand, welcome to the show. LeGrand, are you there? LeGrand, hold on. He might be muted. Might be technical problem on my end. LeGrand,
Tim,
are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Sorry, it's my fault. Yeah, you're great. It's every time we have a technical problem, it's 99% because I'm not clicking the right buttons. But what my go-to excuse is blaming Puerto Rico. So that was Puerto Rico right there, deciding that we weren't allowed to talk.
I've lived island life before too, and I'll tell you, in the F-18 days, more often than not, when we were troubleshooting a technical problem before takeoff on the line, the enlisted technician mechanic working on the plane outside would usually have a smart-ass remark for us like, "Sir, have you tried activating the ON/OFF switch?" And that solved most problems before takeoff.
What is that? What does that stand for? I have to know.
On off. Have you tried turning it off and back on again? The basic,
I didn't even get that. Well, you and I had a conversation. I know, it's awesome. You and I had a conversation maybe 2 or 3 coaching calls ago where I thought it was really interesting. So much so you got me on a mental tangent, which I appreciate, and I started researching a lot of what we talked about. So, listeners, this guy literally is everything I just said. I mean, and a lot more too, obviously. By the way, he's a real estate agent. Did I mention that? And so, by the way, LeGrand, if they wanted to send you a referral, can you tell them a little bit about where you sell real estate?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm an agent with Handsome Properties, Inc. in Charleston, South Carolina. So I grew up here in Charleston. We have a wonderful market, super fast-growing city. Charleston wins #1 awards all the time from travel magazines, reader polls. It's a great market. We have a wonderful luxury market here, both a primary home market and a second home market. And so I've been with Handsome Properties for a couple of years. My previous career was a lot of work in development companies, did a lot of sales and marketing in those roles, but operating strictly as a dedicated broker, I've been doing for 2.5 years with Handsome Properties. So, yeah, at the end of the show, I'll give my contact info. Would love referrals. It's a fast-growing place, so whatever market you're in, you probably know or have talked to somebody who's taking a look at Charleston.
If you guys have never visited Charleston, I have to say it's probably one of the definitely top 10, but maybe in top 5 most beautiful places to go in the spring. It is just shockingly beautiful. Yeah, people don't understand. It's an East Coast place to travel on vacation to. It's not a West Coast place to travel on vacation to. But, man, I have to tell you, if you guys are on the West Coast or if you're listening from Australia or Canada or just whatever, if you're anywhere near the proximity of that city, you got to go visit. It's so amazing. And, I'll tell you just in a little tangent, another thing that's really cool there is last time Julie and I were there, we went on a haunted ghost tour. And you guys have got the craziest and the best ghost stories ever in those old buildings.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
Yeah, Charleston, got we have a crazy pirate history here, the ghost histories, all the, the wars. Charleston's been in the middle of so many stories. So, yeah, it's a fascinating place.
It is. So I wanted to, here's the thing. There's no structure. We have no questions. What I'd like to have these guys hear from you, because you're the real deal. I want them to hear from you really everything. Obviously I'm fascinated with the whole fighter pilot aspect and being Marine, but that's just me and others, and they might not be. LeGrand, wherever your mind goes in our conversation, just let it go and don't worry about there being any particular structure. Because generally speaking, I found when the conversations are just free-flowing, the best stuff flows out. Now, what really what's seated in my brain is when you and I had that conversation, we were talking about, you were calling it the STEM brain, right? And you were talking about how, well, you say what you said to me, and listeners listen to what he's talking about, because what he's talking about is basically how the brain operates under extreme stress, and how in the military, and really, by the way, in life, there's only really one way to counteract your natural inclination to basically want to essentially go in your emotional rabbit hole and wait for clouds to pass. So, sir?
Yeah. So what we were talking about that day is, it was a day where it was a bit closer to all of this news really unraveling and breaking. It's in certain weird ways, we're all getting a little bit used to it already. Although it is very surreal, the new world we live in. But when the whole thing started coming unglued, and there was this sort of feeling of visceral panic and fear in the air, you and I were talking about, like, well, how are people supposed to deal with that? And in our industry, specifically real estate, agents might be confused sometimes. Like, am I supposed to be acting opportunistically right now, or is that sort of uncool? Should I be more offering to go do favors for people, run errands, or, what is my role? What am I supposed to be doing right now? And that led to a discussion about, how we behave under stress. So, looking at it from the military perspective, and obviously my specific experience was Marine Corps and aviation, and people have all kinds of different military experiences. Special operators are doing one kind of thing, and guys driving tanks or fighting infantry or doing another kind of thing, but there definitely are similarities across the board. But what we were talking about is, when you get loaded up under a lot of stress, panic, fear, anxiety, all the above, the nature of war, which is the context of what I was training for, we study the nature of war, and one of the key aspects of it is uncertainty. You're constantly operating in uncertainty. You can plan and plan and plan all you want, but when the proverbial stuff hits the fan, you're reduced, and that's where that word stem power came in. We kind of jokingly called it that. That base part of your brain that goes back to, I think you call it lizard brain or whatever, same concept. Mm-hmm. The most base level of function. We kind of get reduced to that when we're under heavy loads of stress. And the military is very good at training to that. And so what I mean is, when you can dream up all kinds of complicated strategies and plans and complicated techniques for doing whatever it is you're doing. But when you are under the gun, when you are truly overwhelmed, you will basically get reduced to the lowest level of function, that you can imagine. So all of the fancy stuff sort of goes out the window, and you become pretty basic at that point as a person in terms of your capabilities. And the idea that the military tries to instill is you have to train so much, so repetitively, and practice so much that in that moment when you're reduced to kind of blithering idiot mode, whatever, stem brain mode, that you're actually performing at a high level. Because you've done it so much, it's become such second nature. And I think, athletes, performance athletes, elite athletes have to do this, that when you're in that moment that would cause you to be reduced to a low level of function, your low level of function is actually quite high, and you can accomplish some pretty cool things. But that was the gist of our conversation that day.
So let's start out, and we're gonna catch back up. Okay, so you were a kid. You grew up in a real estate family, and listeners, don't worry. We're going to go back to this topic in a second. I just want to put more color on who this guy is. So walk us forward. You can kind of put it on fast forward, but just sort of tell us in what order you did things, and because there's not very many people, LeGrand, that have your kind of educational background that decide to become a Marine, let alone are able, even if they wanted to become an F-18 fighter pilot. And notice I didn't say F-16 fighter pilot, so you did correct me on that. So I was listening.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we don't want to invoke that Air Force rivalry thing. So I grew up in Charleston. My family was a real estate-oriented family from the get-go, so I kind of grew up around it. I was an adventuresome kid. I kind of embraced the idea of adventure and doing different things from an early age. So when I was a teenager, I really wanted to go, asked my parents for this privilege to go to a New England boarding school. I learned about that whole option from other friends and people. But went to St. Paul's School in Concord, New Hampshire. Fantastic school, amazing. Some of my very best friends in the world today still from there. And then that, was a springboard to going to Yale for undergrad. But very formative thing for me. I was always into sports in high school. But in college, I joined the crew team, and rowing, I could go on and on. I could do a whole thing about rowing, but I won't drag that out. But I learned so much from that sport in terms of endurance and teamwork and all these things that were very helpful in the Marine Corps. But, I had a couple of internships in New York City, very interesting jobs. I could have pursued investment banking, which was the hot thing to do in the late 80s. A lot of my friends went that route. They're much wealthier than me now, probably. It just wasn't for me. I kept going to these offices and thinking, God, is this really going to be my life? I'm going to be, an office guy. And not to pass judgment on that. It just wasn't for me. And a crew teammate who'd graduated a couple years before me sent back a training video of Navy SEAL training. He had joined the SEALs. And I watched that tape in my coach's office, and the light bulb went off, and I thought, okay, that's the answer, because that's like being on the crew team with guns, and sounded really fun. And I just wanted the physical challenge and the camaraderie. I wanted the next level of challenge. So fast forwarding a bit here, I really wanted initially, it wasn't like I grew up always wanted to be a pilot. I really thought what I wanted to do was be a special operator, a SEAL, or Marine recon guy. And a great friend of mine talked me into the Marine Corps versus Navy, and that led one thing to another. And then a recruiter said, "Oh, you went to Yale? You should be a pilot." And I thought, no, I want to be on the ground doing Marine Corps stuff. I don't want to, be a pilot. But I changed my mind when I was, doing training in the woods in Quantico, Virginia, and we were doing warfare exercises and practicing talking on the radio to pilots, because that's part of what you do is try to coordinate airstrikes from the ground. And I remember talking to this guy it was my turn on the radio, and there was an F-18 inbound to deliver a simulated bomb on a target, a practice bomb for us. And I read my little brief to him. I'm all nervous on the radio. I don't know if I'm doing it right. And, this guy's going 540 miles an hour, pretty close to the ground. And he comes back over the radio and sounds like he's half asleep. I mean, he had like the late night FM radio host voice. He was like, yeah, this is Nickel 55. I'm inbound. But, I'm sitting here on the ground, like, thinking, how can this guy be going 540 miles an hour, and he's about to go upside down to do this maneuver to go, do this bombing run, and how can he sound so calm? And sure enough, they show up. He drops the bomb on the target. It hits the target. It's plus or minus 5 or 10 seconds of when he said he'd be there, and then he peels off in the distance. And I'm sitting there thinking, okay, I want to do that. that was cool. And so I had a complete mind shift change. I'm like, I wanted to be the ground guy, and in that moment, I was like, nope. I'm pretty glad I got my flight option because now that's what I want to do. So yeah, that led to 9 years in the Marine Corps, and then Harvard Business School, and then moving back to Charleston to help my family at that time with real estate assets they were managing.
So back to just deciding one day to become an F-18 pilot. Sorry, we're not gonna go that fast. 'Cause this was back in the era. This was back in the era of the original Top Gun, right? I mean, so this was for those of you guys who are the same age group as LeGrand and I are, you might remember how influential that was. But this guy actually did it. This guy actually, he became a fighter pilot, the whole thing. What does it take? You can't just one day show up and say, okay, Bob, toss me the keys. I'm going to fly one of these bad boys. What does it take to go from a guy who was basically boots on the ground to then deciding he wants to be an F-18 fighter pilot, which at that time, that had to have been the pinnacle fighter jet in the world, no? I mean, F-18s were, F-16s, F-18s.
Yeah. Yep, from a Navy Marine Corps perspective, F-18 was it, very comparable plane to, the top Air Force jets of that era, which were F-16, F-15. They have, as you could imagine, it's quite a process. I mean, you start out before you even get the option to be considered for flight training. You have to take all kinds of psychological profile testing and medical testing and probing and whatnot just to make the first sort of round of cuts. And then, on my officer candidate school class in the Marine Corps started out with over 200 candidates, and we graduated about 105, something like that. So we had about a 50% washout rate just getting through the officer training, which was sort of the officer equivalent of boot camp. And then those of us who were flight contract people, within the Marine Corps, we have a thing called the basic school. I won't delve into that. It's 6 months where every Marine officer learns to be an infantry leader, regardless of what you're going on to do later, which was highly helpful, useful. Learned a ton there. Then went to Pensacola for Navy flight school. That's where Marines and Navy guys get thrown in together. You're going through the same program. Marine pilots are naval aviators. So we go through the program in Pensacola. You probably remember old Officer and a Gentleman. That was all sort of Pensacola stuff. Mm-hmm. And the next round of weeding out begins, because that in Pensacola is when they really start putting you through very intensive medical screening and testing. It's the Naval Aviation Medical Institute, NAMI, and we used to call it the NAMI whammy. If guys were getting dropped right and left from the NAMI whammy, which was maybe they had a vision issue that was previously unknown that gets discovered, or maybe they're getting chronically motion sick. They had this like sick carnival ride kind of thing they put us on, where they spin you round and round and do all this stuff. And certain guys would get chronically motion sick and couldn't get over it, and they'd wash them out. And then, they put you in the dunker thing where you strap you into this big steel can simulating a helicopter fuselage, and you get dunked into a big pool and turned upside down, and you have to be able to unbuckle yourself and swim out while you're disoriented upside down in the pool. And a lot of swim testing, swimming a mile in a flight suit, on and on and on. So there's people were just kind of dropping right and left. So there's a certain washout rate from that, and before you ever touch an airplane. So then you get in the airplane, and the next round of rigor begins, and you find out that certain people just don't adapt well to the environment of the cockpit, and they gradually load you up with more and more stressful things to do in the plane. And then ultimately, when you graduate from Pensacola, is where they siphon you off to, you're either going to jets or you're going to helicopters or you're going to transports. And usually that's done, at least back in the day, it was done by grades. They just, however you stack up in your class, you write down your preferences, 1, 2, 3, and the higher your grades are, the more likely you are to get your preferences. And then you graduate to the next plane. And
I'm curious. You just said something.
Yeah.
LeGrand, does anybody, and I'm not trying to bag on people that don't want to be fighter pilots, but does anyone who doesn't put number one F-18s? as their preference?
Actually, you know what? Interestingly, it's not everybody's first choice. My best friend at that time, my roommate in primary flight training, really wanted to be a Cobra attack helicopter pilot. He wanted to be closer to the ground. Yeah, it was super cool. He wanted to be closer to the ground, closer to the grunts. He kind of wanted to be the aviation world's closest thing to being a grunt, and he wanted that, and he got it, and he became a Cobra attack helicopter pilot. So yeah, it's not, and some guys are thinking longer term, like, hey, one day I want to be an airline pilot, and I'm better off if I get a bunch of hours, and therefore if I fly C-130 transports, I'm going to log a bazillion hours in the next few years, and that'll make me a better airline pilot candidate. But my average flight in F-18, we take off and train, and we might fly for 45 minutes because we burn through all our gas doing high performance things. And so I didn't log that many hours because F-18, you take off, you go in afterburner, you burning gas at crazy rates, and we didn't tend to log as many hours as guys in the bigger planes. So yeah, people had different motivations and reasons.
You mind if I just ask some fanboy questions that might annoy our audience, but I don't care. I'm going to ask fanboy questions. Is that cool?
Okay. Yeah, right. Sure. Yeah.
I'm like a car nerd. I've done open cockpit racing. I've done stuff like that. I've raced go-karts.
Oh, cool.
But I know none of it. I know, yeah, it is, but nothing compares to what you do or what you did. I want to know, is it impossible to describe what it feels like going that fast, or essentially doing aeronautics at a F-18? Can you even describe it to a layman like me?
Honestly, it's. I think I've never done some of the things you've done. I've not driven, the open cockpit race cars and things like that. And I would imagine some of that is a pretty similar feeling, really, to be honest with you. It's obviously in aviation, you're operating in three dimensions, all three axes. You're not racing on a track on a flat thing. So it's more multi-dimensional, I guess. But it is hard to describe pulling a lot of G's to somebody because, people who drive race cars and do stuff like that do pull G's, multiples of the force of gravity, obviously is what that stands for. So, guys and women going in race cars round and round a track are pulling G's. But in a fighter plane, you might occasionally pull 8 G's, 7, 8, 9 G's, and you might do that over and over again. And that's a very different feeling, and you really can't describe it because your body literally, if I weigh 200 pounds, at 8 G's, I weigh 1,600 pounds. That's a hard feeling to describe to somebody, and it's pretty physically challenging. But, the thing about the way the military works, too, it's not like you go from being a person who's never experienced that to all of a sudden the next day you're doing that. You go into first you're flying a training plane where you can pull 3 G's and do basic things. And then the next thing you're flying a basic jet trainer and you're pulling 5 G's every now and then. And then you're flying an advanced jet trainer. And then you go to the F-18. So, by the time you experience that particular thing the first time, you've been worked up to it over like many months or even a couple of years worth of precursor, So it doesn't happen suddenly, but it's pretty amazing. The planes are incredible, and I'm very jealous of the people now flying the new stuff because I wish I could go back and find out what that's like.
Yeah, do you mean the F-22s and the F-35s? Listeners, if you've never seen an F-22 or an F-35 at an air show, it is. You wouldn't believe it. I've only seen it once. I'm pretty sure it was an F-22. Would it have been an F-22 at an air show in Nevada or an F-35? Do you know?
It could have been either one, honestly. It could have been either one. They could demo. You may have seen both. And what just to geek out for a second, what's so cool about those planes in particular, is the thrust vectoring thing, which means the jet exhaust, the propulsion coming out of the rear of the plane, which in the ones I flew and all the previous types of jets it just came straight out the back. There was no way to redirect that thrust. It only had one axis. It just came straight out, and they provided a lot of force, and then you use the controls to maneuver the plane around. Well, these new generation of planes, they actually, the thrust on the plane the nozzles in the back swivel, and you can redirect that thrust up and down so that they can, what that allows these people to do today is crazy technical maneuvering, like maneuvers that would have been impossible in an F-18 or an F-16 or whatever. They're doing things. And so that'd be really fun. I wish I could go do that.
Yeah, well, I wish I could just go watch it. I'm pretty sure I wouldn't want to be in one of those planes. For me, I think I'd have one of those low barf tolerances. But listeners, you've got to go to YouTube. And a YouTube video is not really going to capture what Julie and I saw in the desert that day when those guys were, performing. But go to YouTube and just put an F-22 or F-35 and watch how those guys can literally come cruising in right above right on the horizon, right above the ground, and just what appears to just stop and then pivot 90 degrees and go straight up. I mean, oh my gosh, the technology available today. It's funny when we lived in Nevada, we saw those those white jets with no markings on them. They would leave the Cairn Air Force the airport, and they'd fly out to what was that place where the aliens supposedly are? What's that called?
Oh yeah, Area 51 or whatever.
Right.
There's a skunk works, where a lot of the flight technology, stealth technology stuff was developed out in Nevada. They call it the skunk works.
Yep. And so, just again, since we're nerding out, you guys are just gonna have to suffer if you don't like this stuff. But where Julie and I have some property there, in one of the condos, we could see that that we lived in, we could see the white plane with no markings on it. What it did is, if you worked at Area 51, you basically flew out of the normal airport in these unmarked planes, and the planes flew out to Area 51. We'd see those flying out every morning, in every day. It was kind of crazy. And the reason I'm bringing that up is because obviously this is where all this technology is created. So people who maybe, I don't know, when would they have been developing F-35s and the vectoring and all that? Would that have been back in the 90s or even in the 80s? When do you think? Yeah,
I would say the 90s is when that stuff. Now, you never know when they really started on it. I mean, I have no idea. They could have started earlier, but in the 90s, the F-18s that I was flying were essentially technology that had been developed in the 70s.
Yep.
So I look back at that, and I mean, the F-18 that I flew was basically like a vintage muscle car. Compared to what is out there now. So I think our flight computer in the F-18, which is, we used that for controlling a radar, a weapons system, communications, all this stuff. That flight computer was far less powerful than the computer in my iPhone today.
So let's pivot this back towards real estate, because the correlations between real estate and sales and sort of the lizard brain reaction to feeling like you're under stress. And listeners, you knew we were going to circle back to real estate. You knew that was coming, right? But what was really fascinating about that coaching call we had is when you're describing, in essence, how the military, and of course this makes sense, knows that your natural tendency when under stress is going to be able to, go to your lizard brain, go to the core, the stem brain. In other words, guys, it's an actual physiological thing that when everyone's under stress, we're all designed to operate the same way. Literally, your heart rate increases, everything in your body's releasing chemicals that's going to cause you to go into the fight or flight mode. And under extreme examples, you literally develop tunnel vision, where basically your vision just, boom, it's like a tunnel. That's what your body's designed to do. All humans are designed to operate the same way. But what's fascinating, and this is fascinating from my perspective, having coached agents forever now, and Julie as well, and all of our coaches, is that a lot of people will hit that maximum lizard brain, point with virtually no external stress. Just the very thought of having to pick up the phone, for example, and calling it for sale by owner, they will instantly go into lizard brain mode, or they'll start on that path. Their heart will race. We've studied this and explained this on our show and to our coaching clients and in our books. But really, guys, what this is a controllable, or at least a malleable psychological reaction that everyone's experiencing. And what I'm hoping you're hearing is that in the military, when they're training elite athletes to become elite fighter pilots or elite soldiers, right, they know that that's a unavoidable natural mechanism that's in all of our brains, and yet they have systems, they have training that basically doesn't try to train that out of people because it's impossible. It tries to show them that even when they're in that mode, they can still perform at the highest level. I think I teed that up for you perfectly. So how do they go about doing that? Explain that in your Marine way.
Sure. And definitely, I want to say, Tim, that I've really appreciated you and Julie's, podcast and coaching, and I want to dovetail that in here because it's very relevant to this concept. Before we even got into this coronavirus stress, before we got into this discussion about, stem brain and operating, at that base level, you guys were already preaching to everybody, look, you have got to put into practice these basic things and follow these basic steps so that you reach a level of getting onto autopilot, so to speak, so that you reach a high level of mastery and it's flowing and coming naturally to you. You guys were already preaching that. So this isn't obviously new to your listeners. And it's a great validation, for you guys and what you've been putting out there. But there's no question that, what you practice will, and how well you practice it, how seriously you take it, will definitely show when the stress comes. And that's kind of what the military operates on. And, thinking back to some of the really basic stuff they taught us early on, I mean, the Marine Corps, what Marine Corps 101, what they tell you is, look, in the Marine Corps, we're either waging war or we're preparing for war. There is no other thing you're doing. You're doing one of those two things. You're either preparing for war or you're waging war. And that's what you do when you're preparing is obviously what tees you up to perform in that moment when things are chaotic. Because the other thing they teach us day one is this concept of the fog of war, which is war is filled with uncertainty, fluidity, friction, disorder, complexity. Nothing is going to be as you planned. It would, it's not an excuse for not planning. We still plan, and we think ahead, and we analyze, and we train. We do all this stuff. But everybody tells you from day one, like, do all your planning and everything, but when bullets start flying and chaos ensues, you're going to be operating in an environment of incomplete information, sometimes conflicting information, fear, danger, all these things. And how you, respond at that moment is what's going to define whether you're successful or not. Success in military means one thing, obviously. It's defeating the enemy, or just downright surviving in some cases. And then in real estate, obviously it's going to mean the survival of our businesses, the health and future of our businesses. Am I going to have revenue, 6 months from now? So yeah, those concepts of, preparing, training, ramping up your base level of understanding so that when you're under stress, your brain is falling back to what you've made habit. It's really kind of behavioral therapy kind of stuff. And as a quick aside, I want to plug this podcast that my wife and I have been loving. Allison and I have really gotten into this Happiness Lab podcast by Dr. Laurie Santos.
You told me about that. I got it too. I've been passing along to other people. It is great. Yeah.
It's so good. And she teaches the most popular class in the history of Yale University. And she's a psychology professor. And her thing is, looking to evidence-based science for, clues as to how we can change our behavior to essentially lead us toward more happiness. I mean, I'm a big fan of pursuing spiritual paths as well toward happiness, but there's nothing to me that's mutually exclusive about a spiritual path and a scientific-based path, working together. And so her podcast is great for this. But the idea is, you modify your behavior to make it a habit. Certain things the Marine Corps wants you to make habitual so that in those stressful times, those habits are serving you well and, keeping you alive and helping you complete the mission rather than falling into disarray and panic, or, in these times of stress, people can sometimes have a tendency to be a deer in the headlights, and just freeze up and not know what to do. So having the awareness, the self-awareness or situational awareness to see that tendency in yourself and say, like, wow, I think I'm kind of freezing up here. I need to do something. I need to take some action. That's kind of a first step, the self-awareness part of it. And then, being decisive, taking action, and putting one foot in front of the other. Just sort of, sometimes it's just as basic as that.
Most people spend their entire lives going from comfort to comfort. They never want to make themselves uncomfortable. They never want to feel stress. It's been normalized to essentially live that way. We're all sort of in this spoiled, entitled, dare I say, blessed era, where really you can live a very nice lifestyle and get away with not really working that much, and truthfully, especially right now, look at all the handouts that are pouring out of the government. Right or wrong, I'm not judging, I'm not being political. It is what it is, and it's going to keep flowing. And so you're going to see this next generation of people that are going to, maybe have universal basic income as a thing. The problem with that, guys, the problem with the approach that so many real estate people in general take, is they never get to the point where they know they can move past that natural tendency to want to just bury yourself in the lizard brain. That's what happens. And so, LeGrand, look at this guy's done. I'm going to brag on you again, right? Yale wasn't easy. He got there. Harvard wasn't easy. I was actually going to ask you. I'll ask you. What was harder, getting a master's at Harvard or becoming an F-18 pilot?
Harvard Business School loves to accept people with military experience, honestly, because the military prepares you so well for business and for the program. There's no question, I think, that business school was challenging. It was great. I made some fantastic friends there. I learned a ton. I was really sad that it ended after only 2 years. I wish business school had been a 3 or 4 year program because I couldn't get enough of it. But the physical, stressful, mental things you got to do to get through either a pilot or a special operator type program in the military. I mean, that's hard to beat that in terms of stress and difficulty over the long haul. Although it's also punctuated with times of boredom. There's the thing about the military, a lot of people don't understand. We watch movies whether it's Top Gun or movies about SEALs, things like that. The movies are all about the moments of excitement and the moments of thrill and nail-biting, terror. But lots of military life is spent in the time in between, and it can be long, protracted periods of boredom and preparedness training, and that can be a real challenge. It's something that, I think you read SEALs comment on this sometimes. I mean, you're out on a boat floating around, waiting for the phone call to go do their thing. And pilots often will go out on deployment, fly off of an aircraft carrier, and just circle in holding patterns, refilling on aerial refueling, tankers, and just waiting for the call. And then, the call doesn't come, you go land and wait for the next day, and on and on and on. And then in that moment, when you do get the call and you're asked to, the SEALs, for example, who had to go get bin Laden, or the, pilots who get called out of a holding pattern to go attack a target or go engage an airborne threat. That moment comes often after long periods of waiting. And during the waiting, you can get complacent and you can get, and I'm saying this because I think this is relevant to real estate too.
It is relevant. I know what you're saying. It makes perfect sense.
Yeah, you can get complacent in the waiting and in the quiet or the downtime. And when the moment comes that you're supposed to go do something and actually do the thing you've trained for, you have to be ready to snap into that mode and go do it, immediately and do it at the highest level. And so that's what you don't see a lot of times in the movies and the stories, is the long, drawn-out wait before the action happens.
And see, this is where we're at right now in real estate, in the economy on a whole. Julie and I have been talking endlessly on our podcast. And it is funny. You and I were having the conversation that you were referencing. It was even before Julie's birthday. So this officially became a crisis in the United States on March 12th, Julie's birthday. But you and I had been talking about it before that. That's how long I'd been on our radars. And it was fascinating, and it is fascinating to watch how people were hoarding toilet paper. That's, those are just the sort of lizard brain reactions that people have to being under stress. You don't know how people are going to operate. And what this should be this time, I hope everyone's taking this as a cathartic moment. In other words, self-discovery moment, knowing essentially how you're going to operate if the zombies ever do come over the ridge. Because the zombies are coming over the ridge now for sure. And they're probably going to be coming over the ridge for quite a while, like potentially years. And what many of you are doing, and you're making an enormous mistake, is you're essentially assuming that everything that worked to generate you leads in business in a distinct seller's market, where you just focused on buyers. You didn't have to know how to price houses correctly. You didn't know how to have tough conversations with sellers. You didn't have to know how to solve multiple problems for sellers. There were just all the things you have to know in a transitioning market like this, or even a buyer's market like this will become. Virtually all of you listening have no clue what I'm talking about. You've never done it before. You've never developed the skills. And so what I'm fearful, and I know this is happening, I can read on Facebook, all of you guys who are emailing and texting, this is the reason I wanted to have him on. A, it was a nice break, right? But B, it was because I wanted you guys to understand there is a path forward for you, but you're going to have to push past your fear. You can't just push past your fear, generally speaking, by saying I'm going to push past my fear. You do it through following a proven path and then practice and then taking action. He didn't spend all of his time in the classroom learning how to fly a jet. They basically, obviously, classroom time after they tested him, said this guy can, he's worthy of us investing money and time in. And then after that, he practiced when he was behind the yoke. That's how you learn. You don't just wait around and get ready to get started and practice your scripts and role play and have role play partners and accountability partners. You get on the phone, you do the real work, you fail forward. That's how you learn. And unlike flying an F-18, you're probably not going to crash and die. Right.
Right.
So
that's the good news about our business is it's not life threatening if we don't perform.
Yeah. But that's the point, though, LeGrand. And this is the conversation you and I had, right? So the psychological effect of feeling the fear of doing what you don't want to do when you don't want to do at the highest level, the chemical release, the endorphins, how we emotionally feel when faced with psychological stress, is the exact same, basically, the same mechanisms and the same things happen as if we were basically under physical stress. And people don't realize that. So our brains don't know how to, level off the level of intensity of fear. If I were to call any of you guys right now and I were to say, let's call an expired, many of you would react the exact same way if you and I were going on a walk and we saw a tiger at the other end of the street. Your feeling, your emotions, your reactions would be the exact same thing. Well, I mean, LeGrand, how do we, you know what I'm saying, because you've basically done the training, you've done the work, so you've experienced having that fear and pushing your way through it. I have a feeling you have an elegant way of describing this to help the listeners understand, maybe from your background.
No, I love the tiger analogy. Speaking of which, we're watching Tiger King right now as an aside at night in our downtime, and it's complete insanity.
Of course you are.
Oh my gosh. So anyway, I mentioned situational awareness earlier, and I think that's something maybe to bring up that's relevant to this and what's going on, and talking about the STEM power thing, and the F-18 is a really forgiving plane, and by that I mean it's for someone who knows how to fly and has been trained to fly it. F-18s aren't famous for just having crazy failures that kill pilots. It's a pretty good plane to fly, reliable plane, redundant systems, all those things. So guys, when I was in, we, routinely had training accidents where someone got killed in peacetime. 90-something% of the time in the F-18 community. Okay, other planes were different, but in the F-18 community, 90-something% of the time, someone got killed in training. It was pilot error. And if you drill down on those accidents and what happened, why did this perfectly good, qualified, well-trained, great guy get killed in that accident? And it was usually from some kind of myopic focus in a moment of stress. And by that, I mean someone's training, doing these things. You know, you're alone in the cockpit, you're flying around doing this high-performance stuff. We call it your bucket gets full. That's another way of saying you're on stem power. You know, the bucket is full, or OBE, which stood for overwhelmed by events. So, you know, this was so common to us, we had multiple ways of saying it, right? Stem power, OBE, bucket is full. You know, so we talk about this stuff a lot in the aviation community, but someone would have their bucket full, might be trying to focus on their radar to acquire a target or their weapons system or whatever it is. And at the expense of all other things they should also be paying attention to simultaneously, and, you know, drive into a mountain or accidentally fly their plane into the water, or fly into another airplane that they should have seen or known was there. This is how people die in peacetime in aviation. And so how does that pertain to us, you know, in real estate? And the point is, we're all feeling stressed right now. I think anybody who says they're not is probably lying. Everybody is under stress. We're all a little afraid. We're all wondering what's going to happen. I loved Brad Inman's comments on your show a couple of episodes ago, you know, about if someone says they know where this is all going, they're BSing. Nobody knows. We're all in the same boat here. And so knowing we're all stressed, you know, follow the aviation rule of thumb, aviate, navigate, communicate. That was sort of religiously pounded into our heads. And that's sort of an order of priorities. And what it meant was, that's another way of saying, whatever you do, don't forget to fly your darn plane. Because if you get too obsessed with some other task, some other extraneous distracting thing, you know, you might forget to do the basic thing of flying your plane. And then that might wind up with you flying it into a mountain or flying it into the ground or whatever. And, you know, I went to a memorial service at least once every year that I was in the Marine Corps for somebody who I knew who had died in training. And these weren't people in combat. This is just flying around, you know, doing our normal stuff. And so each story was heartbreaking, you know, and you see the family getting presented the flag, and and it could have been, and all of us watched that and go, wow, that could have been me. You know, I had close calls. We all had close calls. But the lesson to pull from it is, don't get hyper focused and obsessed on something distracting that could cause you to not be doing what's really important. And so what might that look like
that's
right
awesome
now?
Right there. Dude,
you
that's
know,
awesome.
Right. Yeah. So what does that look like today? If you get stuck watching the news and you get caught in that vortex and snap out of it and realize you just watched the news for a whole hour straight, like that's, during that hour, you were not doing a bunch of other things that might have been more important. And, you know, I'm not saying don't watch the news, don't be aware of what's going on in the world. We should all be knowledgeable. But news is delivered in such small bites now. You can watch the news for a couple minutes and get the point, or you can look at it online and get it real quick. And, you know, don't get sucked down rabbit holes that cause you to be the pilot that drives your plane into the mountain, you know?
Well, I mean, you know, if you want to expand upon that, because I'm totally going to use that, what you just said, that story. You've told me like 4 really good stories on this podcast. By the way, we're way over a half hour. Are you okay with that, LeGrand? I know you're trapped in your house, so you can't go anywhere. I figured.
Hey, I'm good. I love it. Yeah.
I'm able to get all kinds of cool people on the podcast, and I know they don't have any excuses for not being on because they literally can't leave their houses. So,
right.
But what you're talking about, the pretty shiny object thing or the distraction thing, that's been the whole industry since really 2008. There's a whole generation of agents that have just come up believing that you have to, you know, when you have to build a big team, you have to buy buyer leads, you have to focus on your branding, you have to focus on Instagram, and now it's TikTok and all this insanity. And then you know, you mentioned Brad, and I love Brad. He's like a long-term, he's like a big brother to me, basically. I don't know if he knows I think of him that way, but that's how I feel about him. But a lot of what he's been pushing on his platform and his events, it hasn't been what's really ultimately been in the best interest of real estate agents. It's a bunch of gimmicky tech stuff. I mean, most of it doesn't mean a hill of beans. And look how all of it's going to go. Just snap your fingers and it's going to be gone. And so what's happened is we've raised this whole generation of agents, really the past decade, that have never been combat trained. They have never been conditioned for a market like this. They have no clue what it's going to take, not just to survive and thrive. And when I see the same people that have been, perpetuating the bullshit for the past decade, now telling agents everything's going to be normal after the virus is in our rearview mirror, which it won't be, because we're forever changing every aspect of how commerce is done. Every aspect of the economy is going to change. Every aspect of how money is being, essentially the currency now is absolutely positively going to devalue, and we're going to see massive inflation, and we're going to see hyperinflation. We're going to see all these horrible things that people don't even know what those words mean. And Julie and I talked about it a little bit on our podcast and told you other things you can go and listen to. How soon? Who knows? But the reality of it is everything's changed. The virus, the medicine is potentially going to do more harm to our economy than the actual virus did. And that's something that people are just now starting to realize. A lot of people are saying, bailouts, it's the greatest thing ever. Everyone's, agents are going to get unemployment. I can't even wrap my mind around that. There's going to be 12-month mortgage forbearances on everything. So listeners, how does that bell ever get unrung, right? Once people have gotten used to getting that, how do you take that away? You can't. So we've changed society, and we haven't changed society for the better. You're seeing for the first time in American history, now this has happened in history before, but not American history. You're seeing public takeover of private assets. These bailouts that are happening, the bailouts are happening because the government is demanding board seats on those different companies. Julie and I own rental properties. Now we're being told we can't foreclose. I mean, all these types of things that are happening could only happen during a pandemic, could only happen during something like what's happening, but it doesn't unhappen once it happens. And really what's got me up, I couldn't sleep last night because I've been studying this almost too much, is everyone celebrating the $2 trillion that the Fed just put into the economy, celebrating like let's throw up some fireworks. That's no reason to celebrate. That's just, essentially a lifeline to something that's obviously needs a lifeline. But B, it wasn't just $2 trillion. The Fed, if you guys read, they literally have said that, and it was on 60 Minutes 2 Sundays ago, they said there is no limit to the amount of money we're going to inject into the economy. So the original, $2 trillion was what people talk about. That's the headline. But the real number is around $6 to $10 trillion. The total GDP of the United States is $22 trillion in 2019. So the Fed has already committed to basically injecting something like half. And you're the MBA here, guy. I mean, you maybe can explain this better than I can, modern monetary theory. And I don't want to bore people to death. But the moral of the story here, guys, is that everything that you have taken to believe is normal about work, life, money, all of it's going to be in flux. Nothing's going to be the same. And if you're a real estate agent, you're thinking, oh my gosh, what the heck is Tim talking about? This sounds very stressful. It is. But it is unless you know what to do. And it is unless you know how to compete in this market. It is unless if you're not willing to give up some of the fanciful notions of this past seller's market, you're not going to survive. And what I'm fearful of for most of you is you're not going to be able to make it in real estate. 90 days, you won't have any money coming in. Your unemployment might be ebbing. And then what are you going to do? Think you're going to go out and get a job? Nobody's going to be hiring. This is the time. This is an unbelievably scary, weird time in history that all of us are going to remember forever, and they're going to be studying in all the business books, and there's whatever 100 years from now we're going to look back upon this as one of the greatest sea changes in our society, in our culture, and people don't understand that. And what are you thinking?
We're living through an unprecedented time. I mean, it's none of us have an analog for this. None of us can look back and say, oh, well, this is just like when I went through such and such. Because none of us have lived through this before. So we're all kind of learning this in real time. And I can't wait to see the business school cases and books and whatever that are written about all this in the future, and the ethics classes. And this is going to impact every field of study in terms of giving people things to talk about forever and ever, and how it's going to change our industry, how it's going to change business in general. But again, it can be overwhelming to try to take it all in, to try to understand where it's all going. And in fact, we're operating in a time of uncertainty, just like we talked about in the beginning of the show, and in a time of uncertainty, you can get frozen. I think this is a funny phrase that Dr. Laurie Santos used in the Happiness Lab podcast the other day. She said she found herself panic scrolling. That's a great phrase.
Yep.
Panic scrolling. You're just there you are looking at Instagram or whatever, Facebook, whatever feed, and just scrolling through like you're hoping you're going to find something uplifting in there, and half of it is not uplifting. All these scary, unprecedented things are happening, and but then every now and then you come across something that truly is uplifting. The Italians on their balconies singing, in a public square, and the videos like that are kind of show the human side of all this. And I think something else that Brad Inman said that stuck with me in that show, he was talking about a woman who's a friend of his who had gone through an unspeakable tragedy in not too distant past. And when he was speaking with her, and the way she'd handled it was, instead of getting absorbed and down and woe is me and wallowing in the tragedy of it all, her advice to him was, you got to get out of yourself. If you can go help somebody else, if you can be of service and help someone else in a time where you feel, that you're in the midst of a tragedy of your own, it actually, not only are you helping somebody else, you're kind of healing yourself. And I think that's a good, I think that was a great takeaway from him, a good reminder from him, is that, sometimes when in doubt, like a lot of us as agents right now, like, what do I do? I mean, yeah, I'm still showing property. I went and showed property by FaceTime the other day to a couple who made an offer. I'm waiting to hear back this afternoon if our offer is going to be how our negotiation's going. But, they made an offer on a house that they looked at only by me walking through with them on FaceTime. There's still things happening, but then there are other times in the day where we think, well, what am I supposed to be doing exactly? And I think that when in doubt, trying to be of service in some way, shape, or form. And ultimately, that's what our business is, right? I mean, it's an honor to serve people. We are servants of our clients in real estate. And what can I do today to help my clients? And if the only thing I can come up with is just give them a phone call and check in on them and be a human connection for them, because I know they're stressed too, then great. And I think that kind of going back to that basic, I mean, you and I talked about this the other day, just the basics of picking up the phone and calling somebody and being that connection today. I've had numerous clients who I've talked with over the past week tell me, I really appreciated the call. I just really appreciate you calling. And, most of those calls, we didn't accomplish big business. I didn't get a new listing on that particular call. I didn't, nothing monumental happened to my business, but I made a human connection with somebody who's in my circle of influence. And it was much appreciated. Someone, and that appreciation was expressed. Thank you for calling me. I mean, that's just a simple thing, and that's something we can all fall back on right now.
Well, that disengages the ego, right? When you're focusing on being of service to other people. And by the way, guys, we were talking before about the fear that you feel, the psychological fear versus real fear. Real fear is that tiger down on the end of the road. Psychological fear is essentially your body's sort of, reaction to the perception of some external thing that's going to cause them pain. And the example I gave you was the FSBO. Well, the only way to really ultimately unplug that, or at least be on the path to unplugging that and being in control of it, having it be an option as to whether you choose to feel that way or not, is to really focus on the other person. And that is the chess game you have to play with yourself. So if you're thinking about put yourself back in that place where you're going to call that for sale by owner, and you're terrorized to do it for all kinds of, unknown reasons. But let's say you've got some training. Let's say you know what to say. Let's say you've got a script in front of you. Let's say you have a moderate level of comfort that you can handle yourself in that combative, potentially stressful situation. Let's just say that's you. Now, by the way, very few FSBOs are competitive, or they're nice, normal people, especially in a market like this. They all need your help. If you were to if you're thinking about picking up that phone, your chances are you're still starting to feel those stress reactions. Now, do this, guys. Think, my job is to help that person. How can I be of service to you? How can I be of service to you? If that becomes the dominant thought, and you can use that thought to beat down the stress thought, and what happens then is magically you start operating outside of that lizard brain, out of your stem self, right? You start becoming the person that you knew you could be, and that person on the other end of the phone can smell it too. They know you're there to help them. They don't feel your stress. They don't hear your racing voice and your higher pitched, all that. They all of a sudden are receiving what you're saying as somebody who's trying to help them. That's what he's describing. That's what we teach you guys in coaching. And that's how we have to get all of you to push past your, frankly, your irrational psychological fear of doing the real work in real estate. And you have to absolutely accept that pretty much everything that you thought that you were supposed to do in real estate in the past decade was pretty much, it didn't really work then. The reason you think all that gimmicky stuff worked is because houses were selling themselves. And when you have the buoyancy of rising prices and cash flow from houses selling themselves, you create this fantasy world where you think they're selling because of your branding or your website or your Mickey Mouse. You don't really know how to quantify whether something was working or not. Thus, the emergence of all these charlatans and these snake oil salesmen who are selling you all the stuff that was just silliness. Watch how all of them are going to go away this year. And what's going to happen? A lot of agents are going to go away too, because they're not going to take the time to actually learn how to not just survive but thrive in this new market. The fact is, historically, there's more. Some people are going to find this offensive, but such is the way. There are more millionaires and billionaires made in a changing market. There's more wealth created in a changing market than there is in any kind of normal market. So here's what I want you guys all. Here's what I want you guys all to focus on. That was Julie walking into my podcast room. Here's what I want all of you guys to focus on. If given a choice between struggling needlessly for the next year or two, if given a choice between struggling or giving the choice between working through some temporary pain of learning to do what you don't want to do when you don't want to do it at the highest level, which would you choose? Temporary discomfort for long-term growth, or would you basically just still like to hold on to this false reality that the market's going to return? Because it never will. It never is going to return like it was. You can be guaranteed of that fact. That, yes, you can't expect anyone to truly have a 2020 vision of the future, but you can get pretty close under those types of parameters. So I have a question for you, LeGrand. Why did you hire us to be your coach? I mean, you are, by all stretch of the imagination, a badass. Why did you hire us?
I realized that I needed to do better. I needed to do more, all this stuff. I mean, and you've been very complimentary, and I really appreciate it. I mean, all of my great education, all of this time in the Marine Corps, everything else. When I had a lot of professional time in real estate companies, development companies, developing neighborhoods, working on resort development in the Caribbean. I've done all these things in real estate. But when I really put myself to being a dedicated real estate broker in, where that's how I'm going to make my living, I realized that a lot of the things I learned weren't necessarily enough for me to succeed at real estate sales. And naively, I think I figured because of all my background and contacts and everything else, a certain amount of business would just find me. And, the old expression, even a blind squirrel finds a nut every now and then. Some business did find me, but I got frustrated when I realized, I need to do better at making my business happen. I need to do better at building my pipeline. And I started listening to podcasts and trying to find, ways. I mean, certainly I got a lot of great advice from my broker in charge, Debbie Fisher. She's been fantastic. And I was looking for advice and coaching anywhere else too, just to try to build my skills. And that's when I came across you guys' podcast, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to call them up, and I need behavioral change. I know I need to do better, and I need to do better at the things that I'm not wanting to do, just like you're always, preaching. And so your podcast resonated with me. The things you guys were teaching resonated with me. And as soon as you and I had our first introductory call, I realized that you were going to have good medicine for me. And good medicine isn't always pleasant, right? I mean, the first couple of calls were kind of a wake-up call. It's like, hey, what are you doing? Why are you not picking up the phone and calling these people that you've built contacts with over the months and years? And that forced me to do some self-examination. And, I don't know, why am I not doing it? Good question. And so, yeah, it's been fantastic, and it's really been a boost and a change in my business. Haven't known you for very long, but you've already had a positive impact on my business. I'm seeing that, and glad to get to know you guys. Looking forward to many more months and years ahead of listening to the podcast and chatting with you guys.
You'll be a great long-term client, I can tell. That's the reason I wanted you as a client when I interviewed you, frankly. Because you have all the characteristics of somebody that can be amazing. So you just brought this up, and I'm sure all the podcast listeners are going on and know. Just remember you created this moment of stress for yourself, my friend. So why weren't you picking up the phone? Why were you knew I was going to ask? Bragging all that from those previous coaching calls. Why weren't you doing the work?
Yeah, if I'm really honest, and I look at it, I mean, you have to be honest. And by the way, this I'm going to keep tying in Marine Corps lessons wherever I can. Marine Corps has a whole list of leadership principles that they hammer into your head, when you join. If you read them, you can go online and look them up. Just Google Marine Corps leadership principles. The first one on the list is know yourself and seek self-improvement. That's the number one leadership principle they preach to you. And then there's a whole list of however many it is, 11 or 12 more after that. But know yourself and seek self-improvement is the first one. So, we got into that discussion, and I thought, I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of embarrassed. I'm like, why am I not? It seems so simple, like pick up the phone and call. What's so hard about that? But I think what is hard about it is like it's an ego thing. You don't want to be – I kept coming up with excuses. I'd be like, no, I don't want to call up people and bug them. I don't want to be a pushy sales guy. I don't want to be the seen that way. I don't want people thinking, oh God, here's LeGrand calling again. What's he trying to sell me today? I had the wrong mindset about it. And I was letting my ego and my own pride get in the way of doing what I needed to do, grow my business. And as soon as I got over that and went into that first week where you gave me the assignment and said, okay, I want you to call however many it was, 30, talk to 30 people in the course of a week. I mean, those first 30 calls I made, I generated some very serious potential business. I mean, it was like magic, but it's not magic. It's the basics. That's the whole point. And so, yeah, it was an ego hurdle, and just me having my own misconceptions about like, oh, here I am, an MBA, from Harvard. Am I really going to pick up the phone and just start cold calling people and calling? Is that, that was the wrong attitude. I had a wrong attitude about it. It took a reversal, and then that's a behavioral change and a habit change.
Well, everyone has that, right? Everyone has that thing that, it's a common conversation. And it's easy to, the nice thing about that, LeGrand, and everyone listening, is once you push through it, it's going to try to sneak into your life again. By the way, that's just ego. Mm-hmm. But once you keep on, and the way to, slay the ego in that particular example is just to remind yourself that you're here to be of service to other people. And guys, you have to call yourself salespeople. You are salespeople. You're not whatever your business card says unless it says salesperson. And the very reason that you're unwilling to do the real work of real estate, and the very reason that you're not making more money by helping more people, is because you're not acknowledging that you're a salesperson. They expect you to be a salesperson, but what does that mean? A salesperson is a problem solver. That's all it is at the end of the day. But look at all this head junk you guys have. You have head junk about calling and worrying about how people are going to perceive you. You have all this head junk that you tell yourself about doing the real work of real estate. And some of you, most of you, have head junk about building wealth, about being rich, where your money works for you and you no longer work for your money, and you're wondering why you're still poor. You're still poor and will always be poor because you're not willing to do the real work, and because you have head junk about what it means to be rich. Those two things right there. We talk about this on our podcast endlessly. We talk about this in our book, Harris Rules. We talk about this all the time because those two little things, when you can move past that and you realize that, frankly, this industry is the greatest blessing there possibly could be to anybody who has any kind of drive and is willing to do the real work and learn how to help people, especially in a changing market like this. When you can just accept that that is your moral imperative, you absolutely positively have to look at the business that way and stop looking at it as a creative outlet. That's I said this yesterday on another interview. It's so true. Anything that involves creativity right now, just stop. Okay? Do not look at this as you're not at home and you're sequestered and, worrying and wondering what to do. Do not be spending all your time doing TikTok videos, and do not be spending all your time doing all this Mickey Mouse, Look, if your job is to help people, and if you're a professional salesperson, then your job is to help people because you're a professional salesperson. Get on the phone, know what to say, know what to do. And guys, what comes after that is not what you think. Look, if you're willing to do the work, if you're willing to learn the skills, does not matter what the interest rates will do, does not matter what the economy will do, does not matter who the president is, does not matter. It does not matter. You will succeed. Again, because the greatest fortunes in the history of man have always been made during the greatest times of change. I don't know about you guys, but this is one of the greatest times of change that I hope I ever have to experience, right? We're in it right now. Yeah. So this is your opportunity to, I can hear the motivation coming out of your voice. What are you thinking?
No, I mean, it is. It's all hands on deck, red alert. I mean, this is the biggest time of change any of us have seen. I mean, if anyone hasn't figured that out yet, that's it's time to see that. I mean, so
we really are at war.
It's scary.
I mean,
it's
honestly.
exciting. I mean, war is a good analogy for there's a lot of healthy analogies in the idea of war for what we're going through, because it is. It's sort of this invisible enemy, but it really highlights how equal we all are, because this thing is striking down famous people, rich people, poor people, educated people, uneducated people. The virus doesn't discriminate, and the lockdown doesn't discriminate. Some people are in much more posh lockdown situations than others. That's a different story, but the situation doesn't discriminate. We're all in it, and it is going to be life-changing. It'll be very interesting, to see just what aspects of life change forever after this. And who knows? It's all it's not all going to be bad. It's not going to be all bad. I mean, there's going to be some certain, exactly.
It's some of it's going to be wonderful. Julie and I we're running I don't know if you saw this on our private members Facebook page, where we were asking them what positive things are coming and will come as a result of this whole, thing. And some of the answers are brilliant. We're going to start sharing some of those on our normal daily podcast. But some of the things that people are saying are so inspirational, just things you wouldn't even have thought of before. So I'm going to start hanging my hat on the optimistic outcome, opposed to some sort of dystopian future where we're all walking around with big grizzly bears and trying to defend ourselves against the zombies. I'm kind of
right.
There's no future there, so that's not fun.
That's not a very comforting. Yeah, that's not going to be like a help us sleep at night type thing to ruminate on. Yeah, we might as well embrace the optimistic things, because the other side is kind of dark.
But first things first, everyone's got to get their financial house in order. Julie and I created a 3-part Ultimate Agent Survival Guide. We've been talking about this on the podcast endlessly. You guys have got to get this. And what it is the 3 parts. So the first part's called Personal, the second one's called Protect, and the third part's called Profit. You have to be focused on those 3 parts. And what we're trying to do is walk all of you through. And you can share this report with your centers of influence and past clients, your friends, your family, anyone you know, love, and care about, because it's relevant to everybody. So first thing, we're kind of walking you through what you should be doing right now to financially protect yourself, because that's the front lines, your own checkbook. Number 2, we're going to tell you basically the things you're supposed to be doing now to start making money, getting cash flowing. And I'll tell you a little, it should be obvious, not so big of a secret, do not count on the government to have your back. What was it, Ronald Reagan, that said the scariest noise you can hear is a knock on your door, followed by opening the door and hearing someone saying, I'm here from the government, I'm here to help. I mean, you guys have to realize that at the end of the day, you have to have your own backs. You have to protect yourself. You're going to have to you have to learn to do the work that you have been avoiding learning how to do, because you've come up in this fantasy world of this past 10 years thinking that you could basically buy your way into business. And you can't anymore. Those days are over. The buying buyer leads, that's over. The iBuyers, who knows if those guys will ever come back. All this other fanciful stuff is going to go away and never going to come back again. And the only people that are going to be left standing are the people with the skill set. You guys have time. Look, you're going to be locked down for at least another month, 2 months, maybe really, who knows. You might as well really decide to buckle down and master the skill sets necessary for you to one day maybe wake up and find yourself flying an F-18. How about that for a wrap up? So LeGrand,
yeah.
if they want to get hold of you and send you a referral, how can they communicate with you?
All right. Love to hear from people. Again, I'm in Charleston, South Carolina, most beautiful city in the country, and many consider it even one of the most beautiful in the world. And my email address is LeGrand, LeGrand, at handsomeproperties.com, HANDSOME properties.com. My cell phone is 843-810-6450. And love to connect with people from all over. So like you said, we're all locked down, so feel free to shoot me a text or an email or call, whatever. And happy to help anybody looking at Charleston.
So listeners, stay attached, stay close, stay healthy. And LeGrand, hoorah.
Hoorah. Thanks, Tim. Really appreciate it.
My honor, my pleasure.
This program has been a presentation by Tim and Julie Harris, Real Estate Coaching. For more information on our real estate coaching and training programs, visit our website at timandjulieharris.com. Remember to tune in weekdays at noon for upcoming shows. And until next time, thank you for listening to Real Estate Coaching Radio with Tim and Julie Harris.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.